For all those currently captivated by the new show Nurse Ratched on Netflix, you might be intrigued to find out that there's a movie from 1975 called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is a lot less style, but a lot more substance. Welcome to Sam's Cup of Tea.
Sam's Cup of Tea. Sam's Cup of Tea.
Now, having recently seen the release of Nurse Ratched on Netflix, I was intrigued to find that there was a character from the original film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in a series that was completely stylistically different, almost in the vein of like the Marvel universes. It seems to be this new kind of trend where we take characters and there's various new iterations of them and linked universes and multiverses. It seems like the new thing, but Nurse Ratched, having watched the first episode, doesn't seem in any way, shape or form to exist in the same world or cosmos of the original One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which in and of itself seemed to be a very self-contained, realistic drama, and one of the best. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a film I've known for many years. I watched it when I was relatively young, and ever since then, I've loved it. It's probably been on my top 10 list of favourite films ever made. And over the years, I've come to love it more and more, and I revisit it every 4 or 5 years or so. But recently, because I saw the release of Nurse Ratched and watched an episode and was completely massively disappointed, it seems like this show is more bothered about style rather than substance. But if you're looking for something that's got a lot more substance, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is where it's at. I hadn't seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in a long time, and it's just one of those films that you know is great, but you've kind of forgotten about the intricacies of it. It's based on the book, and it's also had a play version of it done, and it stars Jack Nicholson and many, many other actors. Danny DeVito, Will Sampson, William Redfield, Louise Fletcher, who was Nurse Ratched, Sidney Lassick, Christopher Lloyd, Dean Brooks. There's just many people in this film, and of course Jack Nicholson in the centre of it. It's basically about a guy who's a kind of a bit of an outlaw. He's a bit of a rebel, but he's very charismatic and funny, and he gets sent to a mental institute, basically to get out of his work detail. He's in prison, he's at work camp, but he's figured out a way to fake being, mental, or fake being having some kind of psychological illness, and he gets sent to this psychological institute because he thinks it's just going to be a lucky break. But little does he know that he's actually kind of confined himself or condemned himself to a place that's been run by this oppressive Nurse Ratched, and immediately he's forced to live alongside these various institutionalized patients who are played by Danny DeVito and all these other actors. And it is absolutely fantastic. Now, this film is quite self-contained. It's quite small. It's kind of like a play in a lot of ways. A lot of the drama that occurs is actually just between characters. And you can actually see how this movie could easily, or the story, the book, could easily be adapted to be a play. It's less about the directing techniques and more about what's happening between them and what the camera chooses to focus on. Jack Nicholson's character is introduced arriving at the institute, and we kind of have this little dialogue between the facility owner, who kind of has the idea that, you're not mental, are you? You're kind of egging us on, but we'll assess you and stuff like this. And you get this sense of Jack Nicholson as a character. He plays R.P. McMurphy, and he's somebody who's, he's a bit of a rebel. The film doesn't actually try to idealize him as this perfect person or anything like that. He's got a lot of faults and flaws. He's basically a criminal, but he's also somebody with heart and with a zest for life. And he's somebody who you really, really come to warm to, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything he's doing or his lifestyle in general. And so once he's admitted into the facility, he has to go through the daily routines and do this sort of stuff where he takes the pills, and he's kind of questioning, like, why are we given this? What is this daily medication? And all the other patients are very, very institutionalized, but they're all well acted and very, very likable, which is great. They don't stereotype these people into sort of having medical conditions. You really get the sense of humanity in them all, and they've all got these distinct you know, ailments that they're obviously struggling with. But the thing that you really get straight away is that Nurse Ratched is somebody who, like R.P. McMurphy, Jack Nicholson's character, says, she likes to run a tight ship, or she likes to have a rigged game. She's somebody who likes to keep them sort of at a disadvantage, and she has this circle time, which happens very early on in the movie, where she's kind of interrogating one of them, and she kind of pushes their pressure points of what upsets them. So for one guy, she's kind of prodding him and trying to push him to explain why his wife might have cheated on him and been unfaithful, and it's really uncomfortable. And you can see Jack Nicholson's character sort of looking and weighing things up and being like, what the hell is actually going on here? You know, you're just winding them up. And they have a very strict regiment. This is when they do this. They play music, and it's very funny. It's a very funny film, and it's a film that I watched it again very recently with my Korean girlfriend, and I wasn't sure whether she would firstly understand certain points, or maybe she would get bored, and maybe she wouldn't. It's an old movie, remember, and there's not a lot of action in it per se, but actually the whole way through she was completely engaged, because the stuff that's happening on screen is magnetic between the people. You know, Jack Nicholson's trying to play poker with them and card games with them, and they're not paying attention, and he's getting pissed off. And then there's this music in the background, and what is very good in is it escalating the drama. You know, you have somebody getting annoyed, and then you have the music, and then you have someone shouting, and things start to escalate, and the drama reaches this boiling point. And he's like, you know, will you just turn this music down? And Nurse Ratched's like, no, this is for the other people. And she's kind of knowingly likes to antagonize them. And basically, over the course of the movie, you realise that they are institutionalised, and it's very sad. And it becomes this kind of tug of war between Jack Nicholson's character and Nurse Ratched, and he sees how far he can push her. It's about her controlling him and the inmates and pushing against him, and he's pushing back against her. And during the course of this, Jack Nicholson sort of becomes really close with the other inmates. He becomes this sort of leader. He becomes someone from the outside. And the thing that resonates with me the most, and always has done, and especially now, is that, you know, what his character represents isn't this bastion of perfection, but it's the human spirit, and it's this kind of rebellion against bureaucracy and inhumane structures that we create for each other in our workplaces, in our institutions. You know, this kind of mindless thing where we've got the rules and nobody questions them. And, you know, everyone around him is stuck in that. They're stuck in this system that they don't question. And he's going, you know what, why? Why do we have to do this? Why is it, you know, there's a great moment when he asks Nurse Ratched, you know, that the World Series, the baseball game's on. Can you play that? And she's like, no, that disrupts our usual thing. And he's like, life is about variety. And for me, Jack Nicholson's character he's the heart, he's the humanity in this movie. He's like a whirlwind through this very kind of machine-like structure. And it's one of the reasons why, in a sort of metaphorical sense, you could say that some of the mental disorders that we see rising in our societies, like depression and, you know, people taking anti-anxiety meds, are all a sort of result of us creating our own destructive structures, right? We have these very rigid work times and these very rigid structures of this is when you're off and this is when you are. And, you know, currently I'm living and working in South Korea, and I have suffered under the same sort of ruling and felt like a kind of Jack Nicholson type figure, you know, deep down. And it's hard to be that kind of person who goes, you know what, fuck this, and takes the risk. And so I admire that character for going, I'm going to take the risk and say no and refuse to do that. And there's just a lot of mindless bureaucracy that you find. You know, recently in my job, for example, when COVID hit Korea back in March, the government locked down the entire city, or was given orders to say, look, you know, you shouldn't travel unless it's essential. And yet I still had to go. I still had to go to work, even though there were no classes and no other students in, because my contract says it. So I had to go and desk warm each day, you know, actively risking spreading the virus on the buses, and nobody gave me any other indication otherwise. And if I didn't want to go in, I had to use actual sick time, which I wasn't sick, right? It's not actually the right thing. So It's sort of this madness of bureaucracy. The real madness is the bureaucracy and the structures that we create. We create rules to make autonomy and make things run smoother, but what gets lost in there is this sense of spontaneity, humanity. And this film really, really does. When I watch it, I feel that kind of, that's why you become so fond with R.P. McMurphy, Jack Nicholson's character, because that's what he represents. And he's that rebel, and it's that kind of, late for school sort of, no, I haven't done my homework kind of thing, and why can't I write this, and why can't I do this, and questioning the rules. And we've all got that. There's a rebel in all of us, and that's why his character is so likable. Now, along his journey, like I said, he becomes somewhat of a leader, and he gets closer to the other characters, and the other characters themselves have their own personalities that get slowly developed through the course of the movie. It's not just Jack Nicholson's character, but he brings out other characters themselves. And there's a great character, Chief he's called, the big tall Indian guy, and there's a great sort of interplay between them when he doesn't speak, he doesn't say anything, but Jack Nicholson's constantly trying to get him to do things like, come on, Chief, put the ball in the basket, Chief, put the ball in the basket, and he won't say anything. And then later, the twist, you find out that Chief actually can speak. He's not deaf and dumb. He was just egging them on, and it's just this. They have this kind of very close bond because Chief is somebody who, he takes a long time to suss and judge someone out, and he looks at R.P. McMurphy and he realizes that, this guy's actually a good soul. He's a bit of a rebel, and he's not the perfect, most ethical guy. He's definitely, does a lot of, he tells one of the women that breaks into the hospital to, steal a car, just steal it. And it's just crazy. But, he earns his respect, and there's a really beautiful sort of friendship relationship that those two have that prevails towards the end as well. There's also a great bit when he manages to escape the institute and take them out for a boat ride. That's probably my least favourite bit because it's sort of surreal, and it's the bit where I felt like, would this have happened? It felt very fictionally, that bit. But it still is great, and it's great to see them out, and they're on this fishing boat, and they're all kind of doing stuff, and it's a funny bit, but that's probably the only bit that I felt like, would this have happened? I don't know, And towards the end, it really gets quite sad and severe when they actually, they do the electric shock therapy when Jack Nicholson's character is unruly and he fights the staff. And so you realise that he really is under this oppressive kind of structure, and that Nurse Ratched, who is somebody who she's a subtle character in that's something I felt like has been missed in this Netflix show. She's been given sort of this mustache twirling villain like representation in this new Netflix show, but in this she's more of a very realistic character who you can imagine, you've sort of seen these kinds of people, the school teachers, they were bosses at work, and they're just kind of sadistic and a little bit sort of depressed themselves, and they themselves are probably victims of the system themselves, and they're just kind of taking it out on others. And she plays it really, really well. Louise Fletcher is great in this, and she's just very subtle, you hate her, you absolutely hate her by the end. And it's enjoyable to hate her in this, and she's very, it's not a horror movie. It's very believable the way in which she wields this power, that she can, if when R.P. McMurphy, Jack Nicholson's character, fights the guards off, she can say, this is a mental patient that's kind of gone. So, Jack Nicholson's character goes from being someone who feels indestructible, immortal, invincible, this untouchable rebel, to somebody who he's in a context where he's actually quite powerless, and he doesn't have a lot of... He can be very easily branded as being crazy, and at the time they could do electric shock therapy, and eventually the really sad ending results in obviously him having a lobotomy, which is awful, and he's actually brain dead at the end, and it's really sad, and Chief ends up leaving. And I love that ending bit, which is just this kind of passing on of Chief, through him, gains his own confidence back and his own lust for life. And that's kind of the story, the message in it. And we all have a bit of that R.P. McMurphy in us, you know, and I think the movie's message is sort of, you know, let's not ever get too on the side of Nurse Ratched and that culture of, you know, just for the sake of a well-oiled machine, forgetting our humanity and actually resulting in our own madness. Because the real madness in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest isn't the mental patients, isn't the disorders or whatever you see. It's the unwavering cold hand of the bureaucracy and the structures that we create that are just, they're automated, but they've sort of become blind to the humanity in front of them. And that's why I love this film. And also because the performances are just amazing around the board. Fantastic. Especially, like I said, Jack Nicholson, who is just so magnetic in this film. There are so many scenes that I just like to, you know, quote and pick out and watch again. And yeah, I think they won a BAFTA. He won a BAFTA for this and a Golden Globe. I don't know. Definitely won awards for it, but 100% deserved. And I really don't think this movie could ever be done again. It's one of those movies that's just timeless. It's an old movie, but who could do this again? It's just not possible, right? It's just, these performances are so good. And it really is a beautiful film, and I highly recommend you watching it. And so, given that this is kind of a review, it's more like a love letter, I'll have to give One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest 5 cups out of 5, because it is just one of the most incredible films ever, and it's definitely in my top 10 movies of all time. So please, if you've seen Nurse Ratched on Netflix and you've never heard of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or you're intrigued to find out where this character comes from, watch One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to the channel. Sam's Cup of Tea, signing off.
Sam